Let me just start off by saying I am on occupied Manawak land. I looked up a bunch of ways. I believe Manawak is the correct way to say it. So very important to start off with that and center that. Today, I just have a quick little presentation about the Koch network and climate denial, why opposing the Koch network is kind of a much more central issue to the climate crisis than most people believe at first. You guys know at this point already, I'm Cassidy. I think most people in here are pretty familiar with UnKoch. In case anyone isn't, UnKoch's a nonprofit project that is dedicated to disrupting the Koch network's infiltration of institutions of higher education and the ways that they effectively utilize philanthropy to turn those institutions of higher education into machines that they can launder money into favorable policy outcomes for themselves. So money goes in and there's a bunch of different processes in the middle of it, but at the end, the money comes out the other side as tangible, favorable policy outcomes. Oh, okay, sorry, my mouse was acting up. And there's a couple links I'm gonna mention in here. I'm just gonna drop them at the end, most likely. I think that'll just be easiest. So who are the Kochs and what are their networks? What is their network, excuse me? Charles Koch is a billionaire who's at the head of Koch Industries. And I think a lot of you might already know this, so sorry if I'm just kind of like preaching to the choir. But he makes most of his money from petrochemicals, along with his late brother, David. They use those money and their positions of influence within the private enterprise community and the business community to grow a network over like the past 40 or so years that totally serves to uplift, protect their financial and political gains and all of their vested interests in these petrochemical and fossil industries. And their network, the Koch network, is a web of right-wing and corporate donors who combine their wealth and influence in order to manipulate elections across the country, public policy decisions, all with the intent of rolling back decades of both social and economic progress and regulation that stands directly in the way of their profits going up. And I just kind of like came up with an analogy the other day that I think that I try to push everywhere I can now, because I think it's a really useful way of understanding it. A lot of people look at the Koch network as if it's like just this big boat that Charles Koch has. And what I mean by that is, from a financial standpoint, a boat is a liability. You are not making any income off of that boat. It's not an investment. It is just something you have that is like a little side project that you enjoy to do. And in my experience is that's how a lot of people look at the Koch network. They think it's just kind of like this side thing he does because he has political positions that he wants to push. But a more accurate way of looking at it is that the Koch network is like a really big, really expensive house, and that a house is an investment. And you are more or less all of the time, you're making money on that house. It is increasing in value as it sits there. And that's what the Koch network is, right? It's a massive investment of money, influence, and time. That is a direct business asset to Charles Koch and all these other donors, and that it results in these regulations being rolled back and these policies being passed that allow them to increase their profit, increase their bottom line, so on and so forth. That might be more confusing than clarifying, but I think that it's a good analogy to kind of wrap your head around it. Some of the ways this gets carried out, we'll get into this more in a minute, is that the Charles Koch Foundation funds think tanks, advocacy orgs like Americans for Prosperity, just front organizations, and universities to achieve these goals, obviously. State Policy Network and ALEC are two other big front orgs that they have. So moving on to talk about Koch money in schools, right? This is from the latest research that we have, this graph, which is up until 2017, I believe. The graph goes up to 2017, but we also have the numbers for 2019 on its own. So for 2019 by itself, they donated 141 million, thereabouts. And from 2005 to 2017, in total, they donated 256 million, 780, and 623. So roughly $256 million. And you can see on the graph that it's just been growing exponentially, this strategy, right? And that's because it became kind of very apparent how effective the strategy was at achieving those desired policy outcomes that come from it. And just to kind of put out there that this is like not a conspiracy, it is something that the people behind these networks will very openly admit that they're doing. This is a quote that I'd like to drop in. Charles Koch said back in the 70s, there are basically 4 ways the pro-capitalist businessman can fight for free enterprise: through education, through the media, by legal challenges, and by political action. I maintain, however, that the educational route is both the most vital and the most neglected, and we should support only those programs, departments, or schools that contribute in some way to our individual companies or the general welfare of our free enterprise system. Sydney, you have a little raised hand thingy.
Yeah, I was just going to ask a question. You might go into this, but I just wanted to ask in case you aren't, like, what exactly is the mechanism that they use? Like, they donate a bunch of money, and what exactly does that do? So does that does that push like pro-capitalist propaganda in classrooms, like remove like socialist education from curriculum? Like what, and beyond that, like what are we looking at in terms of like tangible things that happen?
Yeah, so I'm actually just about to get into that. How is this achieved? So it's achieved through, and that's a great question. Thank you for asking it, because it segues into this next point. They have this policy, this strategy called the structure of social change. And again, there are publications where their operatives will name it as this strategy. This isn't something we came up with. It is something that they very openly ascribe to and say, this is what we're doing. Oh, and also just a heads up, if there's any questions in the chat, I can't see them because I'm screen sharing. So feel free to do the little raise hand thingy. But back to the point, sorry to digress there. The structure of social change is a modified version of Frederick Hayek's model of production. And if anyone doesn't know, Hayek was an economist from the Chicago School back in like the heyday of the Chicago School of Economics, when they were doing all this weird stuff in Chile. I mean, it wasn't weird stuff, it was violent coups and repression, but all that kind of stuff, just running with this really fringe libertarian economic worldview. And what the structure of social change basically is, I'm just going to skip right to this graphic, because this graphic is a really good way of putting it into motion. So it's a 3 or 4 pronged thing, depending if you want to count legislators in it. But basically, you have the money coming up from Charles Koch. He donates it to a university. And when he donates it to these universities, like that quote kind of implied, there are strings attached to these donations, right? So at GMU, for example, Koch might give a huge grant and he'll say, with this grant, you have to hire these people. You have to include this curricula in any climate courses. These people cannot get tenure, or these people will get tenure. And the kind of most nefarious part about it is that they will fund research whose findings will support their goal. And sometimes they will even fund entire research centers. So the money goes into the university. They utilize the university's research infrastructure and their institutional reputation to push out research with findings that support their goals and their vested interests. And that money goes into a think tank, which are often also housed at universities. The Mercatus Center at George Mason is a big one. The Regulatory Studies Center at George Washington is another big one. And these are all housed within universities and continue to leverage that institutional reputation of the university. So people will like doubt it, very less. If someone hears that something comes from the George Washington University Regulatory Studies Center, there's that kind of trained response to be like, oh, it's coming from a reputable university. It's probably all above board. So those think tanks turn that research into model policy, which gets shipped off to a front group like Americans for Prosperity or ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, which is also being funded by Charles. And then that front group lobbies legislators who are more often than not also being funded by Charles, who then sign that, that model policy into law. And it just it's very easy to obscure throughout this process that whatever idea or whatever deregulation is contained in this policy actually was just an idea that Charles had or whoever in the network had, because the regulation they're trying to get rid of was directly standing in their way of maximizing their profits. And all of this is just a way, like I said, to bypass that regulation. So does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, so it's more about not about the students and their perception of economics and stuff as much as it is about like using the universities, like manipulating the university's network with funds to get legislation passed or
Yeah,
revoked.
students definitely do play a part in it. Like I said, they will some strings attached to certain grants or donations will be that certain curricula has to be taught. And something that they'll do with that, and that's kind of how they continue to staff these think tanks, is once they get students who have been taught this like libertarian economic politics and have kind of internalized it, they have talent pipelines that they will loop these students into to say, hey, come become a fellow at the Mercatus Center. And I shouldn't say more often than not, but often there will be like very tangible material benefits attached to these positions. Like it'll be paid. If you're willing to work in that like sphere of weird libertarian politicking, it can be a very clear pipeline to a career. So they will find students who are either morally apathetic to it or have internalized these curricula that they're forcing the university to teach, and they'll pull them into these talent pipelines. And it's just kind of a never-ending cycle of talent for them to develop to like keep this network staff and keep the systems in motion. And I think there's a non-negligible number of people that are just kind of apathetic or don't really realize what's actually going on. And they just hear, oh, I can get paid pretty well to go do this. It'll look good on my resume. I'm going to go do it. So in that, and when it comes to students, it's kind of a two-pronged thing of targeting people who are apathetic or don't know what's going on, or targeting people who have like really deeply internalized these curricula and believe pretty fully in them. So moving on to Koch and Climate more specifically, I think I hope that it's been pretty clear that climate is like one of their main areas of interest, and that it's like very hard in general to disassociate them from the climate crisis. But moving on to like some of the more specific things that they have done with climate. This is just a quick little definition of climate change denial. I think that everyone here is probably pretty familiar with it, but just obstructing, delaying, or trying to derail policy in line with scientific consensus that says we need to take rapid steps to decarbonize the economy. A question we get a lot, and I think Sydney's question we kind of segued into this a little bit already, but people ask why focus on the Koch network? Why not just focus on like Exxon or whatever? And it's because the Koch family foundations have spent upwards of that $100 million, 127 million roughly, directly financing 92 of these front groups that have attacked climate change science and policy solutions from back in the late 90s to 2007. And another like scope of the narrative that I think a lot of people miss is that back in the mid to late 90s, after the Kyoto Accords, when it was pretty much generally accepted that climate change, the science was sound, global warming wasn't a theory, it was something that we need to work on addressing. But after the Kyoto Accords, the Koch machine kind of kicked into gear and created this whole narrative that we're still dealing with the dredges of today, where, oh, climate change is just a theory, or like climate change is real, but it's not as big of a deal as people make it out to be. So a lot of the skepticism around climate change in today's world come directly from narratives that were being pushed by the Koch network back in the day. So a lot of it really gets traced back to them. There's obviously plenty of other corporate forces and foundations that engage in climate denial, but the resources Koch has invested dwarfs those also significantly. And they are also, like we kind of mentioned at the beginning, Koch is the one bringing all these people together, organizing these other billionaires, executives, and foundations, and kind of calling the shots, right? So let's say you targeted Exxon specifically, or like the Scaife Foundation, and you said, we're going to get Exxon to divest, from fossils. They're going to go totally green, this and that. And let's say you have a win there. You get them to do that. No one else is going to follow suit until Koch gives the okay, right? And the case could be made, well, we could just target all these people individually, and eventually the weight would be pulled out from under him and he'd be standing on nothing. And that's true. I mean, but it's a lot. You would have to run a lot more campaigns hurting a lot more people rather than consolidating all of that energy towards targeting the guy at the top, if that makes sense. And, as I've mentioned many times before, this is all because he has a vested interest in delaying climate action. Petrochemical ops are the main bread and butter of his career and his fortune. Going all the way back to, I always like to drop this tidbit, their oil fortune started when his dad, I think it was his dad, not his grandfather, started selling oil to the Nazis. He was also selling oil to the Soviet Union, and a lot of people think that that's why they hate communists so much, because the Soviet Union kind of like, I won't say screwed them over, but like, yeah, there was like a business deal and the Soviet Union was like, oh, we don't need you anymore, bye. So I don't know if I would make that claim, but that's what a lot of people think. Just as an example, this is like a still from the Center for Independent Thought run by John Stossel, which is Koch funded, and they produce, this is like a thumbnail for a video series that produces videos and content, just kind of like casting doubt on the science of climate change and pushing climate denialism. And they have help from GMU economics professors on this, which is like the real big hotspot, kind of where the Koch network's infiltration into universities really got started. Talking about universities more specifically, I want to give some case studies. So at Suffolk U, Charles Koch Foundation donated over $1 million between 2008 2015 to Suffolk University. In 2013, documents were released to one of UnKoch's co-founders, whose name is Kaylin Jordan. And those documents let us know that, sorry, my words are getting away from me here, that the Beacon Hill Institute essentially, in exchange for these donations, promised corporate donors that it would produce studies paving the way for legislative activity to pare back or repeal the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which was like a regional policy plan in that area to tackle climate change, basically. Suffolk is also the site of UnKoch's first successful disaffiliation campaign. That same co-founder that I was talking about, Kaylin, just kind of managed to rally alumni and faculty and community members, get a petition push going, get alumni boycotts going, and was able to actually get a university to divest from Koch. And Beacon Hill Institute still exists, but it's now like a freestanding institute think tank that has no affiliation with Suffolk U. Tufts University in Massachusetts is a pretty new one on the scene in terms of Koch funding. The Center for State Policy Analysis there is, like I said, a new program that has Koch-linked funding, which obviously raises questions about the independence of the center's policy analysis. The CSPA is financially supported by a joint grant program that comes from the Mercatus Center, which is like crown jewel of the Koch network, that think tank at George Mason that I was talking about, and Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts. And we obviously know that insurance companies have their own nefarious agendas at play. And this program that they're running at the CSPA intends to undertake analyses of the Transportation and Climate Initiative, which is like a New England regional plan to tackle carbon emissions from vehicles. Duke University has the Center for the History of Political Economy, and they have this running program that is called the Hayek Lecture Series. Hayek, that economist from the Chicago school that I mentioned earlier. And the Hayek Lecture Series hosted a guy named Bjorn Lomborg, who gave a talk on climate alarmism. And Bjorn is this really weird character. He has 2 books called The Skeptical Environmentalist and Cool It. And their whole claim, those books' whole claim is to downplay the risks of global climate change. He's one of those guys who won't come out and say it doesn't exist. He just exists. He just argues that people are blowing it way out of proportion. It's not as big of a thing as we think it is, which is still climate denial, as we know. And this dude's totally just a fraud. There's like a Danish committee on scientific dishonesty, and they have ruled that this book is just like total, I'm trying to think of an appropriate word to say, just like not true at all. There's no scientific basis in this book. It's just kind of a total scam. And, you know, I hesitate to say his peers because he's not really a scientist, but like scientists who do specialize in environmental research who have read it, there haven't really been any good reviews on it from anyone who's credible in the area. He just kind of runs around pushing pseudoscience and climate denial. GW is the big one. One of the big ones in conjunction with George Mason, but I'm not going to talk about George Mason today because it's too big of a can of worms. The RSC, I think I mentioned it briefly earlier at George Washington, they repeatedly act as fronts for fossil fuel interests. And like we went over just a little bit ago, they use GW's name to provide that credibility to these climate deniers, fossil fuel cronies, and just like Bjorn, people who run around pushing pseudoscience and climate denial. RSC has received over $1 million from Exxon and Koch combined, who are both jointly part of this fossil fuel empire. And Koch and Exxon together were both kind of architects of, like I mentioned, that narrative starting in the 90s that just cast doubt on the science around climate change, pushed it as a theory, and kind of like similar lines to like Bjorn had, and that maybe it might be real, but it's not as big of a thing as people are making it out to be, and we don't really need to change much to address it. The interesting thing about the RSC is that, you know, policy that comes out of Mercatus and all these other places is always getting passed. Most people don't really realize it because these connections are very easily obscured. But the Trump administration acted on a lot of the polluter-friendly recommendations that came out of the center, talking about like the social cost of carbon stuff and stuff like that. They made it much harder to issue new energy efficiency standards, and generally just kind of like changed the cost or the costs that government attributes to greenhouse gases. And this is one of the more nefarious things, is that RSC was putting out stuff on like social cost of carbon, which I'm admittedly not super knowledgeable about that like specific theory or discourse. But there were all these kind of like theories that they were putting out and no one was putting out. So then when no one was talking about until way later. So when the Trump administration came in, they were like, oh, well, there's only this one piece of research on this, and this seems like a good idea, so we're gonna run with it. So that's a, I guess, newer strategy that I've kind of seen emerging, is that they will start talking about this stuff, or they will create these narratives. Sometimes it's just creating stuff way before anyone else is talking about it. No one will really take notice of it or do any research to disprove it. And then when some politician wants to put whatever deregulation policy they've created into law, there's nothing countering it. So they can just kind of have the way paved for them to go through with it. There is some good news on the GW front. I don't have a slide for it. Organizers with Sunrise GW, who we've been supporting, we being UnKoch, managed to get GW to commit to divest from fossil fuels, to be carbon neutral by 2030, and work to reverse GW's carbon footprint over the past 200 years since it's been around. And they also, they've been running actions recently, taking petitions and open letters to the President LeBlanc store. The RSC tried to clap back at us over that, and they put out like a response, but the response was full of just like misleading statements and lies. So we put out a response to their response that just like went through and was like, this isn't true, that isn't true. And there's a link to that on our site, which I'm gonna drop a link to at the end. So talking about ways to make change, I don't like everything to just be bleak. And I'm sure that a lot of this stuff will kind of be pretty obvious to everyone here. I think that we're all organizers for the most part. But uncoking depends on building grassroots power. Like most forms of organizing, it revolves around establishing and directing enough pressure towards your target, being your university administration or whatever department you're taking on, that they have to provide concessions in the form of divestment and disaffiliation, because their position just becomes untenable. The pressure builds so much that they can't afford to keep the status quo going without giving you some type of concession. And this is a non-exhaustive list of like things you can do to build grassroots power, doing political ed, using petitions to get the narrative out there and bring people into your movement, developing sign-on letters to like get entry-level coalition members in partnerships with other student organizations, state organizations, and then slowly ramping up your asks of them in that coalition. Student government is what it is. You guys are all students. That depends on a school thing. They can be very effective at mobilizing people. Passing resolutions through them usually can't hurt anything. Faculty Senate is has a bit more oomph to it, because at least in Virginia, I don't know about other states, in Virginia, Faculty Senate is at least in name the democratic governing body of an institution, and the Board of Visitors is what we have here. I think other places call it a Board of Regents. Have to like at least somewhat take seriously legislation that comes out of the Faculty Senate. Doing events, skills trainings as a way to bring people in, give them something to benefit from coming out to your meetings, and then try and keep them in the space. And we'll get more into creating and controlling narratives later, but if you're able to create and effectively control narratives, you can target those narratives more specifically at people and saying, oh, either like if you're winning a campaign, say, oh, we're winning, you know, don't you want to be part of the winning side? Like, come join up with us. Or just effectively kind of target a narrative about how evil what your school is doing is and how they're complicit in the climate crisis, and get people who care about that. We're seeing more and more people care about the climate crisis. So those narratives can effectively kind of build out your base. Once you have your grassroots support base, you can use it obviously to disrupt, influence, recruitment strategies, things like that. And, you know, again, a non-exhaustive list. Bird dogging is a really great thing. I think bird dogging, even before the pandemic, went out of style, and I don't really understand why. Because, you know, people who know what they're doing, like if you were to try and bird dog Tyler Cohen or something, who's like a bigwig at Mercatus Center, he'd probably know to just like shut up, walk away. But people who are like new to these scenes, who are new operatives, or just like can't control themselves as well, you can often get them to say some, I shouldn't say incriminating, but pretty damning stuff if you just shove a camera in their face, especially if you shove multiple cameras in their face, especially if you're shoving cameras in their face all the time, anytime they're at a public event. You can just really kind of wear them down, get them to say stuff that they shouldn't say, and then run with that, create a narrative out of that, you know, craft and control those narratives. Political ed of freshmen in general is always important. We were having that conversation before this started about people graduating out and there being no new organizers to take it over. So doing political ed of freshmen in general and making sure you have a clear plan laid out in terms of how power is going to progress down as people graduate out, and specifically targeting students, freshman students in the department that these Koch funded or any billionaire donor funded programs are located. Sometimes people go to these departments specifically, they seek them out because they know about these connections. Other times they're just trying to study something, and if you can get to them before they have any time investment or educational investment in these dark money infrastructures, it can be easier to get them on your side. And then you kind of have some people on the inside, you know, you can say better praise of what's going on. You can more effectively strategize around what's happening, and you can like disrupt from the inside more so, or you can just like poach people out of there. You can disrupt those talent networks that we were talking about and just diminish the numbers of students that they have going in. And again, crafting and controlling those narratives that connect university programs to the harms they're causing. A lot of people think this is a very lofty, ideological thing, but if you're able to really control these narratives about no, Mercatus, RSC, whatever, is directly worsening the climate crisis and destroying our chances of having a livable future, it can win a lot of people over. I've seen a lot of people come over who were skeptical before, but once it's pitched to them that way, they're much more sympathetic to the idea. And the last thing is just applying that sustained and public pressure. And again, I might be preaching to the choir here, but the way I like to think of it is your target, which in this case would be the university administration, is like a lightning rod. And all this pressure you've been building up is like the electricity, right? So you just need to make sure that it's pointed in that right direction and that it's striking where it needs to strike. Leveraging that pressure is integral to getting those concessions that we were talking about. If you just have all this pressure floating around and it's not targeted where it needs to go, there's less impetus for them to make those concessions. But if the pressure is being targeted effectively, it turns up that heat to the boiling point, because there always is a boiling point where they will make the concessions. I would say at least 9 times out of 10, there is. So you just have to get there. And another non-exhaustive list of building and applying that pressure, doing petition, open letter deliveries. This is a bit trickier, or I think now it's back to maybe this could happen in person again, but it was trickier for a while. And the more people you have, the more effective it is. If you print off all the pages of a petition that has like a couple thousand SIGs on it, that can be really effective. Doing press conferences, silent protests, mass mobilization rallies. Press conferences are really great for crafting and controlling those narratives and getting mobilizations or protests or rallies where you have a ton of people out. It's just a way of putting into a visual how many people are unhappy with what their institution is doing. Event disruptions, that kind of goes along with bird dogging, like we mentioned before, disrupting Koch funded or Koch affiliated events being hosted by Koch affiliated departments. Again, back to creating and controlling these narratives. I hate to harp on this, but I found that bad publicity is really the kryptonite of a lot of these universities. It's one of the few things that they absolutely do not like to put up with at all. And it can turn the heat up a lot on them, especially if you use the news media. Social media is important too, especially for building out your base and for getting the information disseminated to other students. But getting op-eds in major papers, getting sympathetic journalists to really dig deep into the issue can be really effective. I mean, that was a big part in a lot of the wins that we did have at GMU back when we were still just trying to get our hands on all the information. And if you have other campuses, especially in your state, that are really on your side, having concurrent actions go off, at the same time, or even just doing those sign-on letters in solidarity to build the narrative of this being a multi-campus fight that's going on, right? And that can really segue really well into controlling those narratives in the news media, because a news publication would love to report on that story if there were like, oh, 3 campuses are all running a campaign to target their administration. Makes for a much better story than just one campus, and they would probably be more likely to want to cover that in depth. If you think your school, I know we're coming up on time, so I'm going to rush through these last couple of slides. If you think your school might be accepting Koch funding, I'll drop this link in a second here. Polluter Watch has a database where you can look up your school and see if it's accepted any Koch money, how much it's accepted, and what specific, depending on the school, what specific departments that money has been going to. Reach out to UnKoch and for assistance in digging up Koch funding connections. Sometimes you really do have to use the Freedom of Information Act to get to this stuff. I wouldn't call myself an expert, but I'm pretty good at doing FOIA request letters. So if you ever need help doing any of that stuff, that's what we're here for. Feel free to reach out to us. And that gets a bit complicated if you're talking about private institutions of higher education, because you can't FOIA them. And I haven't personally found a great solution to that yet, but I have like ideas floating around if that is the case for anyone here. Develop relationships with sympathetic faculty members in the compromised departments. Not everyone in these departments fully buys in to what's going on. A lot of them are really against it, and it's just another way of getting people on the inside that can feed you that information to better create and implement your strategies. And start, it says chapter here. We don't really do chapters like that. But if you wanted to start an UnKoch campaign at your school, we're here to support you in that. Like I said, we were supporting a Sunrise Hub at George Washington, still are supporting a Sunrise Hub at George Washington who's running an UnKoching campaign, but there is no like UnKoch George Washington or anything. I really rushed through that one because I didn't want to keep anyone here late. I want to respect y'all's time. But if you have any questions, that's my email there. I'm also in the Slack for CCC, and that's all our socials. If you would like to follow us. And that's all that I have. I'm going to check the chat because it looked like there were a lot of questions in there, perhaps. And I don't want to miss out on anything. Oh no, it doesn't look like there were any questions. Looks like people were just kind of talking in there. Sydney said comment storms on their posts, though, has worked super well for her. See, that's a lot of these newer social media strategies. I'm a bit old. Like I'm a bit old and I haven't heard of these before. So I appreciate you letting me know. Okay, I just talked at y'all for a long time. So if anyone does have any questions, feel free to drop them now. Or like you can say them now, obviously. Cool. Well, I mean, if no one has any questions, that's all that I have for y'all this evening. Sorry that I had to rush through those last 2 slides, but we're already a few minutes over and I want to respect everybody's time. So that's all that I have. So I appreciate everyone coming out a lot. Oh, wait, let me drop these links that I was talking about. So there are 3 links here. The first is to our 2021 climate report that we just dropped, which details like how the Koch network uses their power, influence, and money to derail climate change regulation. The second one, which didn't hyperlink for some reason, my apologies, is to that Polluter Watch database that I was talking about. And the third one is just to our website, which has that response to the RSC I was talking about before. blog posts, and other resources. And with those links, I think that's actually all that I have for you guys.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, this was
Yeah, of
amazing.
course. I feel like I spit so much information, just like so quick.
It
So
was
my
so
apologies for that. But
That was great. Thank you so much.
cool.
Really appreciate it.
I'm gonna head out. Thank you so much. Have a great night.
You too. Thanks so much, everybody.
All right, I will also head out. Thank you, Cassidy.
Yeah, of course. It was so good to see y'all.
Yeah, you too. This was amazing.
Yeah, good job. And Cassidy, so you've been working with UnKoch My Campus, was it?
Sorry?
You've been working with UnKoch?
Yeah, so I started off originally, like the campaign at George Mason was called Transparent GMU. And that first started, and then a little after that, UnKoch formed. So I was involved in the later years of Transparent GMU. And then when I graduated out, I came on to the UnKoch team back in like February. So I've been involved in like this broader struggle for going on 3 years now, I think. But I've been like officially part of the UnKoch team for a couple months now.
Nice. So I work with Danny at PowerShift, and working on some divestment conference kind of thing, which talked a little bit with Chris at Divest Ed, but also it's been so busy, haven't gotten to connect with, connect with you guys about some stuff, but
yeah, I'm sure we'd love to be a part of that. I know that our executive director was part of like the steering committee for PS 2021. So she might already be, I haven't heard anything about it, so I have no reason to believe she's in the loop, but she could be. But either way, I'd be happy to talk to you guys about that for sure. That sounds awesome. You said a divestment conference?
Yeah.
I mean, that sounds awesome. I'd love to be a part of that.
Yeah. So here's my
Awesome. And I'll drop my contact info in there as well. Make sure it copied. Stuff doesn't always copy from the Zoom chat.
Yeah, it's weird too. It depends on like the settings of the Zoom. Like if I guess they can disable that. So it's like,
yeah. Cool. Well, thank you for looping me in about that. I appreciate it. And I'd love to talk more about it if you want to like set up a meeting or something in the coming weeks.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely where it's been. Well, I mean, just with PowerShift, with the digital conference happening, and there's been just a lot kind of focus on that, and then like,
for sure.
And definitely it's forming around things. But,
cool. Yeah, well, keep me in the loop, and if you need any help on the planning and stuff, feel free to let me know too. I'd be happy to throw in some legwork there.
Yeah, definitely. Like, it's definitely a lot of work to do.
Yeah, let me know. I'm happy to throw in the help build up the groundwork for it.
Awesome. Yeah. How's UnKoch? I kind of caught a little bit in the beginning of like where like I know on some of your campuses lately. How's UnKoch been? Definitely like where the pandemic kind of like has affected a lot of student organizing, but like how has the UnKoch network kind of been?
We're doing pretty good. We have I think most of the heat for us is still building up in George Washington. We launched a campaign at George, or I guess that was my first campaign that I launched at George Mason to it's obviously our overarching demands are still divestment and disaffiliation, but just to get the base built back up, I launched a like smaller micro campaign within that to rename a building that's named after like one of the guys who brought the Koch network there in the first place, James Buchanan. So I'm hoping that heats up in the fall once there's more. There's not that many people on campus at George Mason right now, so it's been tough to get that base built up. But I'm hoping that things are going to heat up back there in the fall because I have a lot of investment there, so I really just want to see a win there. It's been a long time since we had a win there. We're working on launching some stuff up at Tufts too. And those are kind of our 3 big focus areas right now. And the pandemic set everyone back, but we feel like we're doing pretty good with building up our power and building out our base to really hit hard in the fall.
Awesome. Yeah. So it's because I've been coming back into stuff, so it's been a lot of catching up on like I remember when UnKoch was like first like launched back in like mid 2010s, I think.
Something like that. That
early
was all.
2010s or the early 2010s. I don't know.
I think it was mid 2010s. It was definitely before my time when it first got launched, like before I was in these circles at all. And I remember when I first got involved in Transparent GMU, I think it had been 2 or 3 years since it had been launched. So probably around 2014, maybe 2013 was when it launched.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah, I remember like the like when it was like they're doing the Facebook like profile picture where like UnKoch My Campus or whatever like that. I don't know. It's been so long. Yeah.
Oh, are you talking about the little like the Coke Buster thing?
Maybe, I don't know. Like it's
Like
been
Ghostbusters thing,
for
but
like 2014. Like that, like for Facebook, it was just like I think it was a red square or something like that. And like I don't know, like that's where I remember like way back when. It's
I
like,
think that was before my time. I don't think I remember what that was.
yeah, because I've been organized since 2009, so like
awesome.
Yeah, so that's where like I got activated through 33.org and like the launch then on the like
you said?
the first action kind of stuff. That's then once you go back you can never go back.
Yeah. Yeah, that's how I felt when the pandemic started. I really thought that I was just going to be done with organizing for a while. But I started talking to the UnKoch people when I graduated, and they were like, "Yeah, we would love to have you." And I was like, "All right, I guess I'm getting back in."
You can't escape it. You can't. That's the thing.
I'm glad I didn't. I'm really glad to be back in it. It feels really good.
Yeah. It's who we are. So it's like it's like you can step out of the movement, but you never really step out of the movement. Like you're thinking about that. That's what we do. I like to switch it around. So like organizers are healers, and so we're just this thing is like we can't help healing other people. So we don't.
That's
it's weird for us to accept healing.
I really like that analogy because like that's how I've been coming back to it in my head more and more. It's kind of like we're trying to heal the world and heal dynamics that have been so thoroughly harmed by these people with so much money and power. There's not really anything else. I mean, obviously, like in an ideal world, I would love to not have to do this. Like I would love to be in a world where it's not necessary, but as long as it is,
in a world that is already healed, right?
Yeah. But while it's not, I love doing it, and I can't imagine doing anything else really.
Yeah, I was supposed to be like a philosophy and history education like teacher and all that. That was like supposed to be my, and then then organizing happened, and then
Yeah, my original goal was to be like a press secretary for campaigns. Like when I first came into college, that was what I wanted to do, and then I found all this stuff, and I was like, ooh.
Like, here's the real work.
Yeah.
Che Guevara says like before you can change the world, you have to let the world change you, and so it's like, oh man, here it is. Okay.
Yeah, I like that. I hadn't heard that before, but I really like it.
Yeah, that's back in high school, like that's where it's part of the Motorcycle Diaries, I think, like the movie. I think it's like in there is a quote somewhere, but like I took that, I was like, oh yeah, I guess good point.
Yeah. Well, it was super awesome to meet you. I'm glad that we crossed paths, and I'll reach out to you probably like Monday, Tuesday this week and touch base about that conference and see what help I can provide, what you need.
Yeah, definitely. There's definitely plenty. Cool, awesome. Glad to meet.
Yeah, glad to meet you.
Actually,
I'm sorry.
I didn't realize like that this was going on until so I was just check the PSN Slack, and then like under like share amplify that page there, it's like, oh wait, like CCC is having this like, and I was just literally in like there was like I think Divest Head / Future Coalition had like a Divest thing, like there was one of the last sessions for today, and then I was like just checking out, and I was like, oh okay, they're doing this right now. Okay, I just registered, like, and that Exactly.
Well, I'm glad you dropped by. I'm really glad. It was nice to connect with you.
Well, I guess now is dinner. For,
Something like that. I haven't really checked the schedule. I think it is dinner now, and then they have. I think they're doing an open mic later tonight. I probably won't
yeah.
hop out for that, but I might.
Yeah. Zooming too much.
Yeah, a little bit.
So, and I'll send you an email now just to like have a placeholder so it doesn't fall through the cracks too much.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, I'll probably get back to it when I'm back in the office on Monday. Well, I say in the office, but I work from home. You know what I mean.
Yeah, exactly. I know what
Well, I'll talk to you then. It was super nice to connect with you.
Same custody.